Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Heather Isbaron, and with me today is Bob Nations, Director of Shelby County Office of Preparedness, where he also serves as the Director for the Memphis-Shelby UASI. In addition to those positions, he also serves as adjunct faculty at University of Mississippi and University of Memphis. He's also authored 2 textbooks, Introduction to Homeland Security and Introduction to Terrorism. He has 38 years of experience at the state and local level, and today we want to talk about 9/11, what happened before, what happened after, and what are we doing now to prepare for the future? Bob, talk a little bit about that time in 2004 when you served with Governor Haley Barbour.
Well, we had created the State Office of Homeland Security under Governor Barbour's first term. That was an initiative that he prioritized, and so we created that office to serve specifically the mission of Homeland Security. It just so happened that shortly thereafter, Hurricane Katrina came on board, and so the priorities began to change, and we got a very up-close and personal experience at how this system that we've now institutionalized, the response system, how that worked, maybe some things that didn't work. So it became a very significant learning experience, not just for us, not just for Louisiana, but literally a global lessons learned in how to respond to such a catastrophic event, what our gaps were at the time, possibly what they are now. And so it was an incredible, horrifying experience. But I think for those of us that were there, had to deal with it, that was the responsibility. It became a huge experience builder in these careers that we call public safety.
You hear that term where people talk about all responses, whether they're man-made, terrorism, or nature, that they start at the local level. Do you agree with that?
I do. And I think we missed the boat a lot of times in maintaining that as our focal point, and particularly in Homeland Security, because I do believe that the first boots on the ground are the local responders. Here, for example, if we had damage to one of our wharfs, who's on the street right now that's going to respond? Our police, our fire, our paramedics. Those are the first boots on the ground, and they have to be ready in today's environment to respond to the natural disaster, the man-made events, and even those WMD terrorist-related events that come about. Response is a big piece of the pie. Mm-hmm. So it's not just responding to the incident, but our intelligence community, the things we're attempting to do there. So it's a full spectrum again of what our first responders have to be prepared to deal with, but it all happens, it all starts at that local level, and we've got to maintain that focal point, and I hope that we don't move away from that, because then I think we lose that sense of national preparedness.
And I'm not calling you old, but you've been in service for a long time. Prior to even 9/11, I mean, you were there for Katrina, but you were also there even on the scene before 9/11 occurred. What was domestic security like, and what have we learned since then?
Well, in the 1970s, in local policing, we were trained in the SLA, other groups of civil disobedient groups, disobedience groups, activists that may cross over the threshold into acts of violence, and at times did. So we had a lot of training, a lot of exposure of how to identify, what to do to preempt some things. But it was not a priority all across the country. Places like Los Angeles, it was certainly a priority for them, and we just had an exposure to it. So we didn't think really in terms of this big picture of national security, domestic preparedness, and although we would flirt with the idea of terrorism, it was not a homeland issue, if you will, for us.
So give me an idea of what it was like to experience 9/11 from Shelby County.
Well, I actually was not in Shelby County at the time, but just in being prior law enforcement involved with public safety, I think everyone that saw what was occurring knew that the landscape had just permanently changed. Who may have known, who may not have known, almost became irrelevant, because now, whether you knew it or not, whether you could anticipate an attack like that or not, it has now occurred. And so I think all of us that are students of public safety, criminal justice, and fire, I think all of us knew, maybe even without saying, that our environment had changed quickly, it had changed dramatically, and we would have to be willing to change with the times now. I don't know if we've been successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask
that.
you. Uh-huh.
I think we probably moved in some innovative directions, but I'm not so sure that we are headed to the mark, whatever's determined to be the mark. We've institutionalized a lot of things now. For example, prior to 911, if you were in police circles, you didn't have a lot of conversations about NIMS. Right. And today, it's a priority. NIMS training, the instant command system, and how it works. And yet, in each of the major missions that I've been involved in, I've seen it discarded immediately. And that's not to just slam or to be negative, but I think it causes me to look at, on a local level, what we're investing our funds in, what type of training. Training for the sake of checking off a box and saying, yep, did that. That's no training at all. But we have done some fairly sophisticated exercises, and this is always a write-up in the after-action report, that groups and individuals did not follow NIMS. It's consistent, and I've seen that. I saw that during Hurricane Katrina, and so I think my point with that is I'm in the game, so I'm looking at it from a critical perspective, not pointing fingers or placing blame, because I'm complicit with what works and then what would not work. But I think we have an accountability factor to deal with, and it is this: I don't want to do training just to say, yep, we did that. Training, exercise into the real world scenario means something about lives of the first responders and lives of those that we are sworn to protect. And so I'm deeply concerned at this point. Here at the center, great job of educating first responders, and there's a difference between training and education. But I think we also have that sense of accountability, that we have to know what are our focus points, what's working, what does not work. That's my litmus test for being responsible for agencies. We look at it and I say, does it work? Well, why do we stay with something that doesn't work? Is it because it's a mandate? Well, then how do we get into that discussion? How do we get there to say this does not work for us? The other thing is, I think we've come up with a lot of good ideas. For example, the National Response Framework. It's a good idea. It's easy to teach. But we don't, for example, connect the dot and teach our elected officials about the Stafford Act. And the Stafford Act is that huge driver when we have a presidential disaster declaration. I was absolutely stunned working through Katrina in the early days at how many people had no clue about the Stafford Act. So for years now, we've brought senior elected officials in And we've tried to talk to them and teach them about response. Well, there again, I question what we're doing for this reason. I don't need them to know what a police chief does. I don't need them to know what an emergency manager does. They appoint those folks to do their job and report to them. And we're responsible for advising these senior elected officials regarding procedures, protocols, framework for response. But we need them to know what the Stafford Act is. And I'm still amazed that one of the most difficult tasks is to say, we need to be teaching the Stafford Act. Our policymakers, senior elected officials, need to know that. And we have a huge gap that remains at that level. So why are we teaching a mayor or a governor how to respond? I don't want them to respond. I need them to do what a mayor does and a governor do what a governor does based on their conduits. And their conduits need to say, here are your options. And that senior elected official, along with the legislative bodies, they need to know, hey, here's where the Stafford Act applies. We know what that means. We saw governments, local governments, shut down completely in Katrina because they were being told by government so many different things. Yes, that's eligible. No, that's not eligible. And it just caused a big conflict because we don't have a consistent model for saying, here is what you can expect. So in many ways, we've institutionalized a huge machine. Mm-hmm. But if your locals don't understand it, if they don't know how to play in it, mm-hmm. then what have we really done? Have we just checked off a box? So I'm concerned at this point in my career. I'm concerned as a student of this. And I think, Heather, I've told you before that, I had said 10 years ago that this is either going to be really, really good or it's going to be like the dinosaur that 10 years from now turns around and starts to eat its young. And I've seen some nibbling, get started, and I'm concerned about that. Along with that, I think the American public, and I hate that term because I don't, you hear so often people say, well, the American people said this. Well, I don't know where they said it, but anyway, I think the public, we have created an expectation level for them that I'm not certain we can actually meet because I know internally we still have a huge conflict as we go into disasters. And we've got to smooth those rough spots out. Or I think the American public is going to be really unsympathetic at the next big event.
And what is the American public's responsibility for preparedness?
Oh, I think we have a responsibility to, be pushing the citizens training. I know we have a very robust Citizens Corps and CERT program. And we have great spirit of volunteerism in the Mid-South, and I'm very appreciative of that. So I think we have to continue to ensure that the community is community, and that community is the partner, so that your private citizen in the neighborhoods, they know what you are about. They know what preparedness is about. I think the better they understand what we do and sometimes why we do some things, the better partnership you forge. And also, when you have a catastrophic or major event, you don't have enough responders to be on everybody's front door at the time. And so citizens need to be prepared to take care of themselves, take care of their neighbors. And you see that in every event. Growing up and having most of my career in a coastal area, the hurricanes, tropical storms, those things that would become fairly significant. We always saw citizens pulling out the John boats with Evinrudes, and they were going into second-story buildings, helping get people out. They were getting people off rooftops. I mean, they will do that. So I don't think we need to channel that. I think we need to get in on what they do. The other part of the community is our private sector. I think they are one of the most significant partners that we create. You know, we talk a lot about critical infrastructure, and some of it to me is almost a hoax because when we start talking about critical infrastructure, we also have to, at the same time, talk about intelligence and information sharing, and we've seemed to have built these walls for some reason. So we get information, and then we want to classify it, right? And so then how do we start sharing it? Because that becomes a hindrance at times to our private partnership building with our industry. And by that I mean the critical infrastructure of a community is one of the biggest tasks we have. We're there to secure and protect. And it's those properties and those interests of a community. So if we can't talk to them because somebody has said, well, that's on the buffer zone list, and that's under secret cover. What, you mean the people in the community don't know it's there? What are we equipping and training and exercising for if we're not doing that based on the industry base that we have? Responders should not be surprised that they have a huge chemical sector that may be the most volatile sector they have in their community. Why would we overclassify information that would cause less than a good response or put people in harm's way? So the critical infrastructure partnership is huge, and we still struggle with how do we get them into what's being called the fusion centers or the analytical centers. How do we get them in there? I'm still asking in meetings, well, why would we want them there? And it's an incredible question because they are the economic support to a community. They are big partners. So in Memphis, we have FedEx, and we have AutoZone, and we have International Paper, and many others, DuPont. I want them there. I want them at the table because if there is a threat and it's matched with a vulnerability, most likely they'll know before we know. So that's a huge piece of community preparedness. You get the citizens, your business community, your industrial community hooked in, integrated with government. Easy to talk about, huge challenges, but I think to a degree we are creating some challenges where it becomes form over function. Mm-hmm. We formalize it, we institutionalize it, and then we step back and say, well, we've pretty much put ourselves in a corner to where we can't function as effectively as we should. And so, I think probably a lot of people work through those challenges, but I also think that we can't deny that those challenges exist just to say we have a pretty form.
Right. So thinking about another catastrophic event, we hope will never happen, but pretty sure something will happen in the future. Can you look at what it would take to be successful in terms of the state and local preparedness and response?
Well, sure. I think that we are better trained. I think we have a lot more equipment given the focus of the last 10 years, the funding that's come to the local and state response agencies for preparedness. But again, I think we do have to look at exactly where we're headed. What are we institutionalizing? Does it work or does it not work? And that we don't just write something in stone where we can't continue to adapt to what meets the needs. And I think that we don't really have a way to measure preparedness currently. People all the time are all of the time asking, are we prepared? My answer is yes. How do you know? Well, because when the bell goes off, we have to respond, and we'll assess and deal with things, and we'll manage. But I think we can get better, and I think the training and the equipment that came about because of the funding that has been made available has enhanced that tremendously. So I think it's in our policies and in our procedures that we really need to take a good look and to make sure we still keep the focus, the local voice, what's happening at the local level.
All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Heather.